Rhonda.
Welcome to the Global Justice Report,
Look,
an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand, your host for today. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we have discontinued our in-person events and instituted online webinars. Without our previous revenue-generating programs, we now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to continue to pay our Mexican staff. You can donate at our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. Today's program is our 45th webinar. We've been doing these since June 1st, actually. Today, we're very fortunate to have some very provocative speakers with a vision of the future. Michael Lerner, Rabbi Michael Lerner, is a name that might be familiar to many of you. He's a U.S. political activist, editor of Tikkun magazine, and the rabbi of Bet Tikkun Synagogue in Berkeley. In the 1960s, Lerner was a leader in the Berkeley student movement, the free speech movement, and Students for a Democratic Society. Later, he was a leader in radical politics in Seattle, for which he was arrested and did prison time. He co-authored with Cornel West, Jews and Blacks, Let the Healing Begin, a book that was much admired by Muhammad Ali. In 1972, he received his PhD in philosophy, and 5 years later, a second PhD in social clinical psychology. While U.S. society focuses on money and politics, Rabbi Lerner, his central belief is that many Americans hunger for a different kind of society, one based on principles of caring, ethical and spiritual sensitivity, and communal solidarity. He says their need for meaning is just as intense as their need for economic security. He is founder and editor of Tikkun, a bi-monthly Jewish critique of politics, culture, and society. It is a progressive Jewish interfaith magazine. In 2005, Lerner became chair of the Network of Spiritual Progressives, whose mission is to challenge the materialism and selfishness in American society and to promote an ethos of love, generosity, and awe and wonder at the grandeur of the universe. Our other speaker today is Kat Zavalis. Kat Zavis, no L in it. She is director of the Network of Spiritual Progressives and a rabbinic student. She and Rabbi Lerner have co-authored Revolutionary Love, a political manifesto to heal and transform the world. That is the book that they will be discussing today. Kat Zavis, will be speaking first, and after both have made their contribution, then we will open the floor for Q&A, so you will all be able to share your comments and questions. But Let me pass the mic now to Kat.
Thank you so much for having us. Just for clarity's sake, I did not co-author that book with Michael Lerner. I did edit it, but I did not co-author it.
Oh,
so I appreciate the honor, though. I think the way we're going to do this is we're kind of talk back and forth, Michael and I, in a comfortable conversational style, and then we'll open it up for questions at some point. And feel free to jump in, Cliff, at any time if something needs clarity, please. So I'm going to start from the premise of trying to understand, help us trying to understand why it is that even though people's economic interests lie largely with policies that are supported by left candidates, the Democratic Party in the United States and other left candidates around the world, why it is that in spite of that, that so many people have moved further and further to support candidates that actually undermine their economic stability. And when the left, if you will, the Democratic Party and left thereof in the United States and left parties in other countries around the world, look at these issues and ask themselves these questions, they tend to find ways to blame people on the right or people who are turning to the right, rather than engaging in a self-critique of what they may be missing that's making people turn away from them and turn away from the left and turn toward the right. So what Rabbi Lerner does in his work and what I do in my trainings at the Network of Spiritual Progressives is first and foremost, help people understand that people who are not yet with us being those who actually yearn for a caring and just world, those who want a world where people don't have to choose between food and healthcare and shelter, where people's basic needs are met, and where people have the capacity to aspire to find meaning and purpose in their lives and to actually access that meaning and purpose through work and other activities in their lives. Those of us who want that world want to find ways to lure people, to inspire people, if you will, to join our movement. And yet we seem to be missing the mark somehow. And so what Rabbi Lerner has done in his work is to ask the question of why and look at that. And we tend in the left to just put down and insult those who are not yet with us and label them as either homophobic, anti-Semitic, racist, Islamophobic, or otherwise just plain stupid. And generally, it's fair to say that when we put down and shame and blame people, it's not the most attractive way to get them to join our movements and understand why what we have to offer them is actually preferable, not only economically, but also for their hearts and souls. So I think I'm going to turn over to you now, Michael, and we'll jump back and forth as we do, for you to speak about the research you did that helps people understand this, and then I can speak to kind of what we might want to do differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got that second PhD in clinical psychology because I understood that there was something going on in the psychology of people that the liberal and progressive world was not addressing. But I didn't know exactly what it was. So after getting that PhD, I then successfully got a grant that led first to train middle-income working people, particularly people in unions, and then a second grant to actually study the psychodynamics of work and family life in a fairly broad study of what turned out to be many thousands of people. And what I learned was this, that there is a deep hunger for a different kind of world than the world that people have. But that hunger is rarely acted upon, in part because people have, many working people have absorbed really from childhood on, sometimes usually from their parents when they're 2 or 3 years old and on, the notion that they live in a meritocracy, a society based on merit, and that where you end up in this society is a function of how you yourself have been okay, that you have either been okay enough to have made it, or like most of the rest of us, failures because you didn't make it in whatever is your vision of making it. So in particular, in the world of work, where you end up financially is seen as a direct product of what you have to contribute. Now, this is false. Okay, this is a lie, and so I want to say to you that it's very important to try to defeat this kind of thinking. The view that there's a meritocracy, and the truth of the matter is that when you look at the statistics, it turns out that there's been almost very, very limited ability of people to go up the economic ladder without a corresponding number of other people to go down it. It's a zero-sum game. In other words, you can't improve without somebody else losing out. And the meritocracy, the amount of upwardly mobility is very, very small, tiny, like 1% to 2% over the course of many, many, many decades. So, okay, so it's false. It's not true. But most people have internalized this vision, not just there, but this whole notion of, well, you can make it if you really try, or another way of putting that is wherever you end up is a reflection of your worth. That gets taught to people at such an early stage because the parents, good parents, decent parents, they want their kids to be more successful than they are. And so they tell their kids, work hard, study hard in school, and eventually you will succeed way beyond where we've ended up. And this is a central part of the capitalist ethos. It's a central part of the self-justification of the huge disparity between the top 1% of income earners and wealth holders in the United States, and this goes true for most of the advanced industrial countries, the top 1% and the rest of the population. They have the top 10% are doing pretty well, but the other 90% are feeling, oh, I'm a failure. I screwed up. I didn't do the right thing. And this is the consequence of the vision that you can make it, or you've created your own reality. And hence where you end up is a function of your worth. That leads to tremendous self-blaming. And self-blaming is the central sickness of capitalist society, because so many, many, many people, even after the pandemic is gone, the self-blaming is going to still be very much there. And the self-blaming says, I'm a failure. I didn't get what I want in my life. I screwed up. And that gets reinforced, by the way, by certain forms of pop psychology and pop spirituality that tell them the same thing. Hey, you can make it, you can create your own reality. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm a psychologist, so I know that people contribute in some ways to the way to their misery, but it's only a small percentage of what you contribute. Most of us are living lives in circumstances in which the fundamentals are shaped by the nature of capitalist society, and we have very little ability to transcend that on our own. So what are the fundamentals of a capitalist society? That a small group of people have a huge amount of control over the economic reality, which then has a tremendous impact on the political reality we live in, and that it teaches all of us to blame ourselves and feel terrible about ourselves. And so much so that, as I learned in doing this research, that most people carry a deep self-blaming story with them, and they simultaneously feel so ashamed of their failures or not having achieved what they want to achieve that they don't want to even share it with anybody, not even their best friends, not even their spouse. Okay, they just don't want to share it because they feel terrible about themselves. Now, I've made it sound as this is all about how much money you earn, but actually the self-blaming attitude then carries over to all the rest of our lives. So people blame themselves because they haven't found the partner that they want, a partner that perhaps would share their values. Now, why is that? Well, because I'm a screw up, right? I failed in some terrible way. But no, that's not the truth. The truth is that most people have absorbed the ethos of capitalism. And that ethos is look out for number one, advance yourself. And this is constantly reinforced by your experience in the world of work and by the media, by every television show, every sitcom, wherever you go. Even if you look at children's TV, you'll see that that many of the stories are about animals, cute little animals, and one is beating up the other one or getting more of something than the other one. And these, so that really from the time you're 3 or 4 years old, you're getting the message that the world is competition between animals at first and then human beings later on. It's all about who ends up on top. And almost every sitcom reinforces that view of the world. So people come home feeling from the world of work, feeling like, I got to learn how to look out for myself. But that is a very bad way of trying to then build a loving relationship. Now, we ask people, what do you think about this? You know, how do you feel about living in a world like this? And we learned that most working people feel terrible about it. They hate it. But simultaneously, so we said to them, okay, why don't you change it then? You know, get involved in changing it. And their answer was, we can't. Everybody is selfish. Everybody is looking out for number one. So we asked them, wait a second, everybody's looking out for number one. What about your friends? And after some deep thought about that, they would come back with the answer, no, it's not true of all my friends. It's just true of everyone else in the world. Okay, so you have this deep belief that this is what is there, and then when anybody starts to talk about fundamental change, overcoming capitalism, they say that's ridiculous. It's impossible. It's totally not possible. You've got to be realistic, and to be realistic means to accept the status quo as it is and make maybe some tiny little change here or there, maybe get a little bit more money for your work. We asked people how they feel about that. They said, well, if I get enough money, then when I retire, I'll finally be able to do something that I want to do with my life. But up till then, I don't have much choice. Okay, but how did this lead then to people then moving to the right? Well, it turns out that the liberal and progressive world, by and large, holds this same view of meritocracy, including of course, the mainstream of the Democratic Party, but also even many people who are in the most progressive parts of the world, of the political spectrum. They still kind of secretly say, you know, I'm a college professor, I'm a successful lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm something. You know, I have friends who have been successful. I've been successful in some ways, and so it's not so bad. This society isn't so screwed up. So so as a result, it's extremely difficult to get people into the notion of transforming the social order when they think that, well, it's bad for most people, but they've recognized my intelligence, or they've, in some way or other, I've gotten some compensation from all of this. And when they find that their relationships are falling apart, or they never met somebody who had high ideals, or they just can't find people that are compatible with them, they blame themselves. They say, I screwed up, something wrong with me. Now, the right offers, and that makes people feel terrible. And many of them then turn to drugs or alcohol or a variety of other numbing forms of life to avoid having to deal with the pain that they have that feels like I'm such a failure. I've made such a mess of my life. It hasn't worked out in the way I wanted it to be, etc. And we found this, by the way, to be true across a huge swath of working class people, from people who are in the upper middle class all the way down to people who are very poor. So the self-blaming hurts. It feels terrible, and it leaves people wanting to numb it. But one of the things that the right-wing churches have done is to offer a solution. The right-wing churches present the notion that, come on here, we love you. We start with, we love you, you're great, you're terrific. It's not your fault, whatever is going on in this world. And that message has a tremendously healing impact for many, many people. They feel like, oh my God, this is just what I need to hear, is that I'm not to blame for all the things that are screwed up. However, the cost of that is the following, that while it feels great at first, the right-wing churches then say, it's not your fault. And the reason it's not your fault is because there's somebody else who is to blame. Now, then who that other is it differs from society to society. In the 20th century, first half of the 20th century in Europe, the answer was the Jews. If you look today in other foreign countries, in India, it's the Muslims, and in every country where this dynamic operates, the evil other who's screwing things up is whoever is the demeaned other of that society. In the United States, we're very broad in the blaming. That the right wing is, I should say, is very broad in who it blames. So it turns and says, the reason you're suffering is because of African Americans, people of color, immigrants, asylum seekers, feminist women, gays, GLBTQ, with the whole range of alternatives, sexual or identities, and the list goes on. Now, actually, recently, Jews have reappeared on that list in the United States also as another demeaned other, and of course, increasingly, liberals and progressives are part of the blame, or who else to blame. So all of this explains why people feel they're getting something out of the right, because in the left, what they get is blame. And that's what Katz started out by saying. It's a very bad strategy to tell people, you're white, therefore you're bad. You're a male, therefore you're automatically a sexist pig. This way of approaching people doesn't work. It makes people want to run away from us. So Kat articulated that very clearly. If we want to change things, we've got to, on the one hand, we've got to end the self-blaming and help people understand that it's the system that they're in that is making it very hard for them to get not just the kinds of economic success, but even the relationship success, the success in family life that they might want to have. It's very hard when you're living in a society in which looking out for number one, advance yourself without regard to the consequences for others, is so central to the ethos built into the ethos of global capitalism.
Michael, can I jump in here now?
Yeah,
for a
please.
second? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm just going to jump in and speak a little bit about, you were just speaking about the problem with the left and the problem with the Democrats is this tendency to blame and put down people who are not yet with us, whether they're white people or men or people with good jobs or who think differently even. There's this pervasive way in which there's an insulting capacity in the left often for people who are not yet with us. But the other aspect that's problematic in the left that you've spoken to and has been written about in your book is that the left, the Democratic Party, let's say, through its neoliberal pro-capitalist policies, never speaks to people's pain, to their psycho-spiritual pain that you've started to speak about. In other words, living in this society where we're constantly told we're not enough. And each one of you, I invite you to just take a moment and ask yourself, what is my self-blaming story? Because we all have them. And if we are able to speak to them and identify them, we can start to free ourselves from them and recognize that it's actually not an individual failure, but it's embedded into the systems and structures of our society. And that's what the right fails to address, right? They blame it on some other instead of acknowledging it's the problems in the systems and structures. But what the left does is that they propose and pass laws, as Biden even has been doing, important laws, important changes and policies to address economic pain and suffering, and to address people's political rights, namely the ways people and groups of people have been marginalized and oppressed in our society. So to uplift LGBTQ people, to uplift people of color and Black people, et cetera. All of that's important and critical. And we support it all, and it's really wonderful, but they don't speak to this brokenness in people's hearts, this psycho-spiritual crisis that gets soothed when they're told by the right that it's not their fault. It's not their fault that they're not as successful as they want. It's not their fault that they haven't achieved a level of success or relationship status or education, etc., that they want. Because in fact, people yearn to be of service. They yearn for a world in which they have meaning and purpose, a sense of belonging and connection and love and care. And the left does not speak to these needs in any meaningful way. They speak to only the economic changes. And so this is where the book starts to speak about creating a society that shows real subjective caring, a post-socialist, post-capitalist society. And to get there, we need to build a social change movement that does this as well. And I can speak to that, or if you want to jump in, I see you wanting to jump in, so go for it.
Well, just want to say that because the one element that I left out that actually was central to why this message is never heard in the left is that the other thing that we discovered was that people have a hunger for meaning and purpose in their lives that transcends the selfishness and materialism of the capitalist marketplace. And this leads many, many people to some form of religion or spiritual life. And not all religions and religious practices or in the United States and in other advanced industrial countries are right wing. Not all of them are that. But people are hungry for some kind of meaning to life. But when one of my first books was called The Politics of Meaning, the hunger for meaning and purpose that the left will not address. And the result was huge amount of ridicule and put down on the part of people in the liberal world and in the progressive world because of the deep religiophobia that persists in the in large sections of the left. That is that they can't get that people could be rational and even progressive and on the left. And this is amazing when you realize that the most successful movement in the 20th century of the United States and the North American, United States, the most successful movement was the movement led by Martin Luther King Jr., who every single demonstration came out of a church. Literally, physically, they came out of the churches from their services onto the streets. How could the liberal and left world have ignored that fact, ignored the power that comes from combining some kind of spiritual vision with a radical economic and political transformative vision? But not only do they ignore it, they put it down. It is extremely difficult in the left to be taken seriously if you start to talk about hunger for meaning and purpose in life that transcends the materialism and selfishness of the capitalist marketplace. Very, very difficult. Not impossible, and there are corners of that that are developing, but by and large, it's very, very hard to be taken seriously. And I remember when for the short period of time, Hillary Clinton, after hearing me speak and then reading Tikkun for several years before she became, before she entered the White House, gave us talk saying what this country needs is the politics of meaning. Almost every liberal and left venue started to make fun of it and say, "Ah, that's ridiculous." And she quickly ran away from it and back into what became the opposite, extremely self-interested and not at all concerned about the welfare of middle-income working people. But I'm saying that part of the reason why people don't deal with that is because of the tremendous hostility that comes from on the one hand, a long history of Marxist put down of religion, right? That it can, the only way that Marx could understand it was as a poison, as I'm forgetting his term now, but as a
Opium for the masses.
An opium for the masses. Yes. Okay. So thank you, Kat. So and that became central to the materialist focus of so many left movements, including right up till today, that they focus on material needs. Now, look, I want those material needs. That's the part of socialism that I'm totally for. I originally I was one of the founders of the New American Movement that eventually merged with Democratic Socialists to become the Democratic Socialist Alliance, DSA. And I spoke at the DSA's founding convention. I've totally embraced the economic policies that says redistribution is critical, and taking people's material needs seriously is extremely important. But that's not the only dimension. Now so part of it was the Marxist heritage that makes it hard. But the other part is this: lots of people have grown up in families where religion was used in a racist, a sexist, a homophobic way. So we have in our progressive movement lots of people who are victims of families or parts of reactionary trends in religion that then generalize that to all religions and don't see the possibility that the same religious community that they escape from is not the only kinds of religious communities. They have such a hard time grasping the possibility of a progressive religious community, and so hence they don't speak at all. They think that that's soft, silly. The governor of California used to say about the left, "Oh, they're girlish, they're and I said, yeah, girls are great. You should be proud that we're girlish, right? What's wrong with that? That's a good thing, not a bad thing. But no, we have if we want to prove that we can fight with and win the battle against the conservatives and the reactionaries, we have to show that we're just as hard and tough as they are. And that's the reasoning why, even when writing this last book, and I went and spoke to people who are in social change movements or leadership of social change movements, or people who are doing research for in various say governmental institutions, and I say to them, why don't you address this other element? They say, well, you have a point there. Actually, privately, I actually go to it. I do yoga, or I do some kind of spiritual practice or whatever, but I'm not going to make that out in the public sphere, because then they'll call us soft, and not, in other words, we don't want to look like we're girlish or that we are soft. So to be hard, we have to have hard data. We have to have stuff that is fits into the dominant view of what is real. And the dominant view of what is real in capitalist society, this was from the beginning of capitalist society, was this: what's real is what can be verified through sense datum or measured. And if it's not measurable, it's not, you can't verify it through sense datum, then it's some other realm. It's a realm that doesn't have any place in the public sphere. You're entitled to do whatever you want privately. So if you want to have a private practice like that, spiritual practice or religious practice, fine, but don't bring it into the public sphere. The public sphere has to be verifiable. Okay, now, of course, what that does is, what can't be verified in that way? Ethics. Ethics can't be verified in that way. Love and kindness can't be verified in that way. All of the things that are central to building a different kind of movement. And that's why we, in the work that we are doing, and Kat, I'm going to pass this on to you, talk about a new bottom line. And so a new way of looking at what counts as important and successful. Take it away, Kat.
That's the ball. So one of the things that we talk about is the need to create a social change movement that does a few things differently than what it's done thus far. And one of those things is to put forth a vision of the world that we want, our collective dream, rather than limit ourselves to what we're told is realistic. So it's interesting in this time with Biden and the left pushing Biden to see that you can see some ways in which they're stretching further than we have in the past to put forth broader policies and positions. And yet they're still limited to the extent that they believe that they're realistic. So I often see things in groups that I'm involved in say, well, we can't push for that because it's not realistic. It won't get passed. So we shouldn't even promote it. So instead of going for a living wage, for example, we're promoting a $15 minimum wage, which by the time it gets instituted, even with inflation, is not enough for people to live on. So what we speak about is the need to put forth a vision of a world based on a new bottom line. And what's different about that is that it's not something that's as tangible as the current bottom line. So the current bottom line, right, is we measure success to the extent to which we maximize money, power, fame, and status, let's say. It's tangible. We can see how much money's in our bank account, how much money's in the account of the government or a business, and it's very measurable. But a new bottom line is something much different. And a new bottom line says, let's measure success. So let's measure what's rational, productive, and efficient, not to the extent that it maximizes money and power, but instead to the extent that it maximizes our capacity to be kind and caring, loving and generous, to the extent to which it teaches us the skills and capacities to be empathic and compassionate, to the extent that it allows us to fight and struggle for social, economic, and environmental justice and environmental, Michael likes to say, sanity, like a world in which we're deeply aligned with the needs of the life support system of the planet. And in addition, imagine all of our systems and structures. So our healthcare system, our education system, our government systems, all of our nonprofits, all of our corporations, all of these systems and structures asking themselves, are we uplifting these qualities in those who work with us and in the way we operate in the world? And are we uplifting the capacity for us to respond to the universe with awe, wonder, and radical amazement? Because in order to care for, to truly, truly overturn our entire personal lives and the entire economic systems and political systems of our society in the world, we need to find a way to deeply connect, to deeply take in the cries of the earth, the needs of the planet. And one way for us to do that is to take time every day to connect with the planet, to connect with earth, to connect with the life support system of the planet that gives us life. Literally, the trees give us life. We get breath and air from that. And if we don't transform our systems and structures to take care of that, then we will not be sustained, and the planet will not be sustained. And obviously none of the animals and all of the sentient beings on this planet will not be sustained. So we're trying to promote a vision of a world based on a new bottom line. And what we want is for social change movements to not only continue to fight in their individual silos, whether it's in the environment or whether it's in racial justice issues or whether it's in women's rights issues, to not only fight in those areas, but to articulate those particular struggles as part of a larger movement for a world based on this new bottom line. Because in truth, they all want that. They all want a world based on a new bottom line, but they're resistant to articulate it that way because they're still confined by the capitalist ethos that we have to fight against each other and that we can't really struggle against capitalism because that's such a losing battle. And yet that is the only way that we're going to live sustainable lives as individuals and as a collective and sustain the planet. Capitalism is not going to get us there in any way, shape, or form. So that's one thing that we need to do as social change activists and movements, is to start to put forth this vision of a world based on a new bottom line. And on May 11th, I believe, we're having a call because we're going to be launching a campaign for a new bottom line to get people who are interested in promoting this in their local communities, with their city governments, with their county councils, to get resolutions passed so that governments will start to look at the way that they're doing business, the way that they're running their government, the way that businesses are doing their business through this lens of a new bottom line. So that's the first thing that we need to do. The second thing that we need to do as a left movement is to emphasize that we have a shared humanity, and to do that through what I've called prophetic empathy. So prophetic empathy is, it's not just really, really good empathy. Empathy is the capacity to connect with other people and show that we get their experience, not imposing on their experience our own truth and our own experience, but that we're standing in their shoes and we can look through their lens and really understand how they see the world, even when they see the world in ways that are causing such pain and harm to others, but not stopping there, because that's not enough. But challenging them to understand that the way that they look, the lens that they look through, is filtered through many, many layers of distortion of the society and of their family and of their schooling, and to unpack those distortions for them, to help them see their own self-blaming stories, to help them see the ways in which they have been told to believe that capitalism is the only system we can have, and to help them see the way that capitalism poisons them, to help them reconnect to their yearning for a world of love and justice, for their yearning for meaning and purpose in their life, for their sense of belonging and connection. And so that's the second thing we need to do as social change activists in movements. And the third thing we need to do is honor our diversity of faith, belief, and reason. So this doesn't mean that accepting falsehoods or truth, but rather understanding that people who have deeply held spiritual, religious beliefs are not just stupid, that they are smart, and that their beliefs and views are worthy of respect. We can certainly, and we should certainly, disagree with and challenge policies and positions that are oppressing others, that demean others, that put down others, that promote a worldview of fear and domination rather than love and care. But we don't have to do that in a way that puts them down. We can challenge their behaviors and beliefs without insulting and demeaning them. So it's, I don't know if there's something you want to add here. I'm noticing it's 45 minutes into the call, and Cliff, you said about 45 minutes, you want to open it up. There's certainly more we could say, but I also want to check in with you and you, Michael, if there's something else you want to add right now.
Well, I'll just add just this one thing that we often say to people: don't be realistic, because being realistic means accepting the view that the ruling elites of our world say is possible. And they say, you've got to work within the framework of what is. And we say, no, there is a different way of looking at the world, to look at the world from the standpoint of what could and should be. And that, that our task is, as progressives, as spiritual progressives, is to put forward a vision of the world as we hope it can be and we believe it can be, and to fight for that rather than to narrow our vision to what the power brokers tell us is possible. And unfortunately, that view of what is realistic shapes the view of many people who agree with everything else that we're saying, but then still say, yeah, but it'll never happen because people are just a certain way. And the vision, the lesson that I take from 20th century social change movements is this: when African Americans started to ask for an end to segregation, Martin Luther King was faced with many other African American clergy who said, please don't do that. Let's just focus on some much more narrow thing. Okay, maybe it could be getting the right to sit in to sit in a non-segregated lunch table or a hotel, but don't try to end segregation. It's too big, and you'll win nothing. Be realistic. Similarly, when people in South Africa said we want to struggle against apartheid, so many other people said, "Hey, you're looking at something too broad. You can't change this. This is fundamental to the way this society is based." When women came forward and said we want to end patriarchy, now so many women looked at their more radical sisters and said, be realistic, nothing like that is going to happen. Just let's see if we can get a slight raise in the pay that we get so that the disparity between our pay and the other people's pay isn't so great. Now, I don't mean that the women's movement has yet succeeded in overcoming patriarchy, but the changes that have been made are amazing, astounding, probably the most significant changes that worldwide that have been seen for the last 2,000 years in the status of women. Amazing changes. So, and that's because the second wave of feminism refused to be realistic. Okay, they refused to accept that the talk, not just of the country, of the power brokers, but of their own sisters, their own family members, etc., who are telling them it's unrealistic to think you can in any way break down the ethos of patriarchy. Well, they've made incredible steps forward. And when gays and lesbians started to ask, we want the right to marry, again, their fellow people in the same movement as them said to them, no, don't go there. It'll never happen. It's impossible. So the message that I take away from all this is this. You never know what is possible until you struggle for many years, sometimes decades, for what is desirable. You'll never know what is possible until you struggle for what is desirable. And until you do that, you will be accepting the message of the powerful, and things won't change in any fundamental way. So with that, I think we can open the conversation to questions or debates or whatever you have that you'd like to, or your own views, whatever.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for that. By the way, your last comment reminds me of one of the slogans of 1968, demand the impossible.
Right, exactly.
As we go into our Q&A time, let me say a word about how we're going to do this. Some people are viewing this on YouTube, and you don't have any way of directly putting your questions or comments to our speakers, but you can get that to them by sending an email to global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. and I will then relay your what you have to say to our speakers. Those who are here in the Zoom room with the speakers can put your questions more directly. And we do that by, you can simply wave at me and I'll call on you. If your video is off, you have to turn your video screen on so I can see you waving. And so you can get your questions in and even engage in dialogue with our speakers. Okay, Leslie, I see Leslie Mitzi. Hi, Leslie, good to see you again.
Hi,
He's been a frequent visitor here in San Miguel.
indeed, and hope to get back next year again. I've been reading the Tikkun newsletter for a long time, and I'm very impressed from Canada. We've really been feeling the pain of the last 4 years, but we know that things are not changing enough now, even under Biden. So I used to be doing the workshops of the Pachamama Alliance, and the motto was, we want to bring about a human presence on Earth that is environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just. And one of the things we did there, they had some wonderful videos. Somebody was counting up the number of organizations that have those goals. And they were saying the hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. How can we bring all these people together who are in small groups, separate, and wanting to make this a better world and realizing that there needs to be some real change? That's my question.
Kat, you want to try?
That is a $64 million question. If I had the actual answer to that question, that would be a huge gift. But I think that one of the things that it's that this speaks to, that's important to recognize, is that all of these groups are operating in their particular silos. All of them are struggling for the same dollars to support their organizations. And if we could start to acknowledge that we're struggling against each other in the capitalist system for limited resources, or for what we believe to be limited resources, and to come together under an umbrella of a world based on a new bottom line. I don't mean necessarily under the umbrella of the NSP, the Network of Spiritual Progressives. That would be great, but that's not actually what I mean. What I mean is under the umbrella of a world based on a new bottom line. And if we could all say more explicitly, we share a goal of a world based on a new bottom line, along with these hundreds of thousands of other organizations, then we would start to draw connections. And then people who are involved in particular aspects of each of those movements, some of them are going to be very localized and small, and others might be larger. They'd start to realize that they're not alone, and it would feel like a collective movement that wasn't pitting one particular silo, one particular identity group or issue against another. And how do we call all these groups under that umbrella? That's the work that we're trying to do. And it's a challenge, partly because we're steeped in a system that tells us we have to climb up against each other to get to the top, instead of telling us that if we were to unite and work together, we could actually get there together. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Michael.
Well, just to say that though I agree that almost all of the social change organizations do share a desire for some fundamental change, they rarely articulate what that is, what their vision is of the world that they actually want. And that's why we think that the new bottom line potentially provides the framework that would not in any way disrupt each organization's search for money or influence or whatever they're searching for, but would give people a sense of, oh, we are all united on this much. We don't want productivity, efficiency, and rationality. to be judged solely by the degree to which any institution maximizes money and power, but rather that it should be judged by the degree to which it maximizes love, caring, kindness, and generosity, ethical, environmental, and social justice, and enhances our capacity to see other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, enhances our capacity to look at the earth with awe and wonder and radical amazement, rather than looking at it simply from the standpoint of how can we convert it into something that we can sell and to make a buck off of. That new bottom line would actually appeal to almost everybody in social change movements and would make it possible for people to unite, even though they can continue on with all their particular projects, but just having at the beginning and end of every meeting, stating what this new bottom line is and why we're for it, would make people feel like, oh yeah, I'm not alone, and our organization is not alone. It can be part of this larger whole, and all these different organizations that seem to be different from mine. They might be working on environment, or they might be working on police justice, or police injustice. I mean, and whatever. But they all share this common new bottom line. That's our way of thinking that we may be able to move people to a more unified vision of what we want in the world.
Thank you. That's excellent.
What Kat described, the kind of politics she summarized, is what Reverend William Barber calls fusion politics. He sees that as coming about by conversation among different groups who, in that conversation, come to realize that they all have one single opponent that they have to be fighting against. And it's that common enemy that brings them together. Now, what Michael is suggesting is that you need more than that. You need a positive vision as well as a negative enemy, correct?
Yes,
Yes,
and
exactly.
I'll add one thing, and then Michael, if you want to add more. Yes, what we're putting forth is that we need a positive vision, and also that we need to speak to the psycho-spiritual crisis. So to the extent that any effort, any movement effort speaks only to people economic pain, it's going to fall short. It's going to fall short. And so we need to speak to people's yearnings for a loving and kind world. And that's what the new bottom line offers. It offers a way to speak to that psycho-spiritual crisis in people's lives.
Are there other questions or comments among the people here in the Zoom room? I see David Schweikert has joined us. Karsten Struhl is here. Joyce Carlson also. Joyce, let me call on you. I saw your hand first. You have to unmute yourself.
First, I want to say how much your book, Rabbi Lerner, Spirit Matters, meant to me years ago, and I need to look it up again for sure. And I went to Cuba with our host, Cliff Duran, and I saw how the purpose and meaning the Cubans had to develop what they are working on. And it was an important part of my life. And second, I wanted to talk Kat's first question about why is the right so strong? I've been studying moral psychology and evolutionary psychology. And these people are telling us, and they have science and data, it's amazing, that the right has evolved, born with a predisposition to different moral foundations and values, and they act on these. They're in their subconscious. It's incredible what they've come up with. And this is spelled out in Moral Foundations Theory by Jonathan Haidt. Maybe you've heard of him. He's a professor of ethical leadership at New York University, and moral foundations theory is widely accepted at this point in academia. Psychologists are really working it over. Evolutionary psychology explains where our moral values came from and how they're different. And it's really spelled out for an introductory book, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. It's incredible. And he has multiple talks on YouTube. And one is called Where Our Morality Comes From. And we act on these intrinsic moral values. They are more important than extrinsic influences that come from capitalism, he would say. Our intrinsic moral values. I wish you'd look into that, but thanks so much for what you gave us so much to think about. And this is being taped and I'll have to listen to it again, but check out The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Moral Foundation Theory, and you'll see where the right is coming from. Start to understand them. Thanks. All done.
Thank you. Thanks.
Do either of you want to comment on that?
No, I'll have to read the book.
Okay. We have a question that has come in. I'll get to those in the Zoom room in a minute, but the first question has come in on from YouTube viewers. Let me put it up here. Oop, wrong one. I want to put that screen up for you to see the question Morris has posed. Doug is a frequent viewer of our webinars. He writes, there's a tendency, even among progressives, towards cynical misanthropy. That is to blame human nature for the problems of the world. Kindness and love are for them pie in the sky. How do we help people move beyond the cynical and misanthropic tendency to blame a red in tooth and claw human nature? And then he has a second question. For those outside socialist struggles or those inside, how would you differentiate notions of revolutionary love from more common understandings of love?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll take the second one for sure, that revolutionary love means the ability to treat other human beings, or everyone on the planet, as though they are equally valuable and equally sacred. So love often appears in our experience as something between two people, a man and a man, a woman and a woman, or a man and a woman. But it usually is encapsulated in a rather narrow frame. But what I want to say is that most people have the capacity to care for way beyond the people that they are having sex with, or that they are living with, or that they're having children with, or whatever. That we see this in moments when people transcend the structures of our society and act in a way that is very caring towards others. So I'll give you one example. On 9/11, when after the towers were assaulted and by two airplanes, the there were many, many people who were caught inside the World Trade Center, and hundreds of people, I mean, thousands of people ran down, saw this story, and instead of hiding under the bed, ran down to that spot to see if there was some way they could help. Hundreds and hundreds of them went inside the buildings to try to see if they could pull other people out, knowing that they were risking their lives. Hundreds of them who risked their lives actually lost their lives in this attempt to help other human beings. This is as much part of human nature as all the selfishness and materialism that the capitalist order treats as the reality. Now, hopefully we don't have to go to that extreme to lose your life in order to be somebody who participates in revolutionary love. But what you do have to do is to be willing to say, everybody on this planet counts, at least every human being. There are others who say that's too narrow too. It should also include all animals on the planet. But I'm willing to take the first, if we only got people to care equally well for every other human being on the planet, that would be an amazing transformation that would change many of our economic and political arrangements if people could get behind that. And what I say is, human nature, forget it. That's not, human nature is something that we are continually reshaping. We are, human nature is the nature that we shape within ourselves and within our friends and family and people that we meet. And that is the nature of human beings. There's the nature of human beings to change their nature. And so that's, there's this great economic textbook whose author I'm forgetting at the moment, but he wrote it maybe 50 years ago. And he would, in the text, he starts by talking about the experience that the colonialist forces had when they went into Africa and South America and other places where they were trying to create domination. And they reported back and said, a lot of these people in these native lands that we're going to, they're not really human, because they just work long enough to satisfy their needs. And when they've got their needs satisfied, they stop working. And then when their needs again call upon them, then they go back and work a little bit more. These people aren't really human beings, because human nature is to work and accumulate as much as you can. But these people aren't accumulating as much as they can. They're sharing what they have, and they're working much less than we do in the emerging capitalist societies. So the result was to say, these people who live like that, they are really not human. They're savages. They're barbarians. There's something wrong with them. They're not part of human nature. So it took a long time before the capitalist order was able to shape people enough. It's really only the last 200 years that they've shaped people enough to be actually acting on the capitalist values. Human nature is, as I say, is something that has been changed over the course of human history. Now, if you look back and see what stories are told, the ones that the ruling elites, the storytellers that the ruling elites said, these stories are the ones that we need to keep going, were ones that reinforce the capitalist ethos. So they put the capitalist ethos back 2,000 years rather than when, and ruling elites in the past have often use those same stories about what it is to be human nature. But human nature is always, it is the human nature of human beings to reshape our nature. Kat, do you want to deal with the first question?
Well, that was the first question, but I'll say a few more things
Oh, I
about
thought
it.
you did a second.
So it's fine. You merge them into one, which is great. So in terms of human nature, I always like to say, I have never seen a baby under, let's say, six months or younger, or even a year or younger in most cases, be selfish. They don't self-blame either. They don't look at a 6-month-old who's rolling over and saying, what's wrong with me? Why can't I roll over? Oh, I better take that from them. They take and share and give back, and because they want to be in connection. So if you were to hand a baby something, the first thing they do after putting in their mouth is give it back to you, because they're seeking belonging and connection. And mother, like if you look at nurturing in societies around the world, it's human nature to nurture and care for your young. And so the question of what is human nature depends on what we're uplifting as human nature. And so the capitalist ethos, as Michael said, wants to uplift human nature as being competitive and power over. But that's what we've created. We tell our children from a very young age, you have to be competitive to get ahead. And school perpetuates that with grades and judging, and only certain numbers of people can get A's. Not everyone can get an A. What would happen if everyone got an A? That would be terrible. How would we judge who's the best and who's the worst? So when people ask me that question in my training, which they do all the time, we kind of have this conversation. And then the second question had to do with this desire to give. I think it had to do with like socialist desire to give or something like that. Cliff, can you just remind me a little bit of it? Because there was one point I wanted to make, but I can't remember. Anyway, I'll just say what I was going to say. It ties into it, which is that I'm not going to say it because I just lost it. It just went out. If it comes back up, go ahead.
Yeah, that first question was about the tendency, even among progressives, towards cynical misanthropy.
Nature, right. And the second one had to do with, what was the second one have to do with, Cliff?
How would you differentiate notions of revolutionary love
yeah,
from more common?
Right. So the other way I would distinguish that is if you look not only during this pandemic, but at other times in natural disasters, as Michael said, or man-made disasters and 9/11, people are so willing to give money when people set up GoFundMe campaigns to strangers. Now, it might be a stranger of someone I know by 3 or 4 people down the line. Sometimes it's complete strangers. People raise money for their healthcare expenses and for their children's healthcare expenses, often from complete strangers, or as I said, people who know somebody, kind of the 9 degrees of separation. But we struggle against creating a society that does that. That's what government is for. Government is there to take care of each other. If we participate in a society in which we build up a government that cares for each other, then we don't have to do this individually because we've done it as a society. But the capitalist order tells us, no, we have to do it individually. So part of revolutionary love to me is creating a society where we show acts of love through our acts of care. It's not a feeling of love. It's not like, oh, I'm in love with you or I love you. It's I care about you because you're a human being and we share this planet together and you're worthy of being cared about simply because you are. And that to me is part of what revolutionary love is.
And I'm going to add a word about cynicism. Most cynicism is the radicalism of people who have despaired after trying in various moments of their lives to be more connected with what they really want, a world of love and care and kindness and generosity. And then it got defeated in some way or other. The movements of the 60s were actually defeated, and they were defeated not only by the state, though that was important. I was sent to prison and many other people were sent to prison. Some people were killed by the state. But there were many people who looked around and said, I don't want to risk getting killed like the people on Kent State and Jackson State and so forth, other places where the state actually started shooting demonstrators. And then to justify it to themselves, they say, well, that's all I could do was I tried to change things. Nothing could work. And so I've developed a cynical attitude towards anybody who wants to change anything, because I know it can never happen. It's a defense against the part of them that really yearned for a different world, and then it didn't appear right away. And there is this tendency, particularly among young people who get involved in social change movements, to, after a few years, to say, "Oh, we worked for a few years and nothing happened, I give up." It's much harder to recognize that the changes we want are ones that are going to take a fairly long time, and that we need to nurture people's capacity to be in it for a longer times. Now, what does nurture that? Well, for one thing, that doesn't is the way the current social change movements operate. They operate with very strong focus on achieving some particular goal or other, but they don't list as the goals that they have a goal to care for each other in these movements, to take care of each other in these movements. Okay, so and that's one big difference about that and a church. If you go to most churches, right wing or even left wing churches, they have as their goal not just to sell their particular vision of God and so forth, but also to care about the people in those churches. But in social change movements, we never even begin to articulate that. I've never been to a social a demonstration. I've been to zillions of demonstrations. I've never been to a demonstration where the people running it said, okay, we're going to take now 10 or 15 minutes, turn to some people you hear you don't know, introduce yourself, get to know each other, because part of our goal in this movement is to make it possible for you to have new friends, new connections, and to learn about people's needs other than your own, or other than your own small group, because we are about caring, building the caring society, caring for each other and caring for the earth. But caring for each other means not just caring for the people I already know, but caring for other people I don't yet know. So we want to care for you. If you're part of our movement, we want to care for you. And that also means finding out, is there something that you need that I might be able to help you with? Okay. I often say about my experience in progressive synagogues is that you go in there, you hear a great sermon, and then when the service is over, nobody talks to you and you go home. But when you go to an Orthodox synagogue, and I'm not recommending anybody do this, but if you go to Orthodox synagogue, I often had the experience of hating the sermons, hated their politics, but as soon as the service was over, people came up to me and said, hey, do you have a place for lunch? Would you like to come to my house for lunch? Is there anybody in your family who's sick or needs a visit in the hospital? We do that here. We want to, and if you're single, would you like to meet somebody who might be a potential partner for you? Because we have people who are single, other people that we can introduce you to. These little things are the nits and grits of caring for other people. Is down at that level, and our social change movements never, to the best of my knowledge, I have never encountered a social change movement that said that one of its goals that had to be acted out in our meetings and in our demonstrations and all that we did was to care for each other in those movements.
Let me next pass the mic to someone who is a model of that kind of caring of the progressive community, David Schreiker. Hi, David. He has been a big supporter of the Center for Global Justice, and I want to publicly thank him for that. He's also going to be a speaker in our webinar series in, I think, about 3 weeks. But let me give you the mic now, David.
Well, thanks. I actually watched the first part of this on video. I mean, your main presentations. Then I wanted to switch over to Zoom so I could say something, and the whole system shut down, and it took me like 10 minutes to get back. I really did like the presentations. We were almost on the same page, and just a couple of things. I want to mention a book two quotes and then an issue of concern. A book is one I really thought about, Michael, when you started talking about meritocracy. You may know the book. It's by a famous Harvard philosopher, Michael Sandel, The Tyranny of Merit.
Yes.
What's become of the common good? And it's just a big critique, of meritocracy.
Sandel is one of the people on our advisory board of Tikkun magazine, and has written several times in Tikkun.
Yeah, okay.
A great guy.
Excellent. Another was a quote that I will actually be using my talk in a couple of weeks. I want to talk about religion and Marxism, actually. But it's Reinhold Niebuhr's quote: "Religion makes good people better and bad people worse." So I'll just hold that for a minute. Another, you were talking, Michael, about Marxism, about religion being the opium of the people. But do you know the sentence before that, which is never quoted? Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the spirit of spiritless conditions.
Yes.
And I argue, in fact, it was a talk I was going to give at Providence College as a keynote to their conference on Catholic social justice, social teachings. And it was going to be, can a Catholic be a Marxist?
Uh-huh.
Or can a religious person be a Marxist? And I want to argue, yes, of course. In fact, religious people ought to be Marxist, but that is another issue. I mean, I do argue that this whole issue of atheism is way overblown. You don't have to be an atheist to be a Marxist, but that's another matter. I'll talk more about that, in a couple of weeks. Yeah. The other question, though, another completely different issue. It's not even it's the issue, of social media now, and how that's allowing people just to come together in a positive direction, but also in a very negative direction. And how to break through to that. And there again, I know what you're saying about looking down on people, but I mean, on the other hand, is it possible to love someone like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg? And I saw a long article, on the head of the Boogaloo Boys, and so on. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and you get these people together, and of course, the right has a lot of funding coming in, especially the libertarian right, and so on. Well, I don't know what you think about that. I really worry about that, in terms of.
Well, first,
yes, human beings do need to feel like you're part of a group and part of something larger yourself. That was the big power of the communist movement. You could feel like you were part of a global movement to change the world, and that gave you identity, and so on. Well, you're getting this kind of stuff on the right now, and it's really scary to me.
Yes. Well, I mean, you've got a lot of different issues there that I wish we had more time, you and me, to talk about some of these things in greater detail. I hope you'll read the book Revolutionary Love, because I think you'll find it that I'm not tossing away Marxism or socialism or whatever. I'm incorporating what I think is good in it and transcending what isn't so good. And what I'm saying to you about what isn't so good, okay, and I mean, I used to teach Marx. I have my PhD thesis was largely on Marx, or at least a significant part of it was on Marx. But there's a deep problem in Marxism. It is inheritor of a fundamental worldview, the capitalist worldview, or the worldview that's the radical imperialist worldview that says that which you can know is that which can be measured or verified through sense datum. And anything that can't be measured or verified through sense datum is nonsense. So much did that worldview triumph that now we use the word nonsense as equivalent to not worthy of respect. Okay, the Marxists have never been able to overcome that within the framework of Marx himself. Even though Marx in the early writings, and you're quoting from the thesis on Feuerbach, I believe, and that that when Marx said that, the earlier part, the key point that I make is he didn't build on the part of it's the compensation of a heartless world and how do we make it a heartfelt world. He so much of his later writings were building on that part of saying religion is the opiate of the masses. So and that's what has stuck. What has not stuck in Marxist traditions is asking what are the fundamental needs of human beings that this capitalist world doesn't deliver, and they are not only material needs. And that's the point of the research that I did many years ago, and that has been continually reinforced by by lots and lots of other empirical data, that people's hunger is not only for all the things that a Marxist platform would develop, but also for a world of caring, of kindness, of generosity, of ethical, a higher meaning to life and a higher meaning to work than what I can accumulate personally. It's connecting to something of meaning and purpose to me, of higher meaning than simply having more money or a good way of retiring. That discourse is largely out of the communist movements. It wasn't there through all the history of the communist movements. It was very rarely talked about, the higher meanings, and said that was dismissed as basically nonsense. And so that's a very big deficit there. Now, in terms of the second part, I'm sorry, now.
Loving Bezos and loving Jeff Bezos and
Mark Zuckerberg.
And Mark Zuckerberg. So these
okay. So we are not advocating that you love Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, if we could get to the point where you could love the other people in your movement, it would be terrific. Okay, if you built a caring movement just for the other people in your movement, but then if you face the people who voted for Obama in 2008, okay, they knew he was black. Okay, they knew he was black. Those people who voted for him then, who've moved to the right subsequently, are not intrinsically racist. Okay, but we act as though everybody who's moved to the right is fundamentally racist. If we could get our people to love the people who were with us at one point and who abandoned us later, we would have a winning movement that would be able to take back all the state houses each state house of every state in the United States has now the majority of them are run by Republicans, both as the governors and as the elected
representatives in the state house.
What the state? Yeah, the
state legislators.
The state legislatures. So
I want to
love the people who were with us one time, who then moved away. Bring them back out of the love and caring of this movement. You don't have to love Zuckerberg. That's a big jump from loving the other people who are getting screwed over by this society, not the ones who are running it. Kathy?
I also want to say that, again, the definition of love here isn't, oh, I feel so good about them.
Right.
The definition of love is being able to see the ways in which their perspectives and worldview are distorted by the capitalist ethos and by the worldview of domination, and helping them to see that and doing it with love instead of with shaming and blaming and judgment. That's what loving is. It's not, oh boy, I can't wait to go up and hug you, or I feel so good about you in my heart. No, it's being willing to stand in the truth that there are distortions in our society that people don't see. And we've seen this throughout history. All of us have experienced it in our lives where we've learned something new that we didn't know, and it's changed our whole perspective. So I want to just be really clear about what it means to love. And I see another hand, so I'll just stop there.
Yeah, if we can go a little bit over time, we have two more questions or comments we'd like to entertain. Start with Bob Datz.
Hope I'm unmuted. Okay.
Yes.
So it seems to me that, the spirituality and the ethics, all boiling down to like universal empathy, has very little to do with organized religion. And I think the task, as you work in a social movement or in various social movements, your task is to enlist people to your point of view. And it seems to me that the frustration of people on the left is justified when religions are actually responsible for some of the most destructive views on the environment, on feminism, and other issues, so that the task is to literally peel people away. Like Martin Luther King wasn't, he was quoting what he had to quote, but not every Baptist would agree with what he was saying theologically. I just, if you guys want to quote, comment on this, it seems to me that the institutions, you need to gently peel the good people away to get them to look toward the values that you're talking about.
The values that I'm talking about are right there in the Bible. They're right there, at least in the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew prophets. They're very, very clear there. And many people who have reread the New Testament from a progressive standpoint also find them there. I think that you're talking about the actual development of religions in which some have developed in reactionary ways. That's true about social change movements also. That's true about, take a look, you have to just look at the Marxism that flourished, that led to the current reality in China, or the Marxism that flourished in many other societies, in Soviet Union for such a long time. There are oppressive forms that use the language of what was started out as a liberatory movement, use it in an oppressive way. And it's not just in churches or synagogues or mosques or whatever. It's in, so to say, well, okay, that's intrinsic is not true. It's not intrinsic, but it is dominant. Okay, it is dominant in many churches, many synagogues, many mosques, etc. Okay, I'm for the people who are struggling for a different reality, a different kind of world, and we have, one of the things that we should be doing is building cadres of people who do find meaning in religions to go and struggle in those institutions against the distortions that exist there. But it's a mistake to think that they're all that way. If you look at the civil rights movement, the biggest supporters of the civil rights movement, apart from a large group of progressive young people, were the churches. They played an incredible role. They played an incredible role against the war in Vietnam. Okay, I was an activist organizing then. They were doing great jobs bringing, when we tried to shut down Washington D.C. in 71, the churches brought thousands and thousands of people there to those demonstrations. I'm telling you that it is not intrinsic in the religion. It is intrinsic in distortions of the religion, but that's the same thing I have to say about Marxism or about socialism. Socialism in many countries that call themselves socialists. I mean, after all, first of all, Hitler called himself a national socialist. There are so many ways that any set of beliefs can be turned into its opposite and distorted. And you don't throw away the beliefs, you advocate for what's good there. So, but if you toss away everything, you lose a huge number of people who are potentially our allies. That's the best I can say. You see, yes, was that you?
For our closing or final comment, I'd like to take us back to your opening point about meritocracy and what has given rise to the far right that is so prominent today. It is true that the white working class, not the black working class, but the white working class has moved greatly to the right. But I think we have to understand that in the historical context in which it arose. After World War II, there was a period of economic expansion that created the largest middle class US society has ever seen. Many people of working class background were able to realize the American dream. Suburbia, house, family, car, camper, all of the rest of the material goodies that the consumer society had to offer. And they saw themselves in meritocratic terms as having been successes. They had achieved what they aspired to. And they saw that incorrectly as of their own doing. They did not see it as the result of New Deal property policies, as a result of the economic expansion, of the economic dominance of the United States in the world economy, most of which had been devastated by World War II. It was those circumstances that made possible their prosperity. Well, in the 1970s, that began to collapse. And it collapsed as a result of the neoliberal policies that the political leadership, both Democratic and Republican, fostered. And that has led to the hollowing out and of the middle class and the downward mobility that many have experienced. Well, just as those white working class members had seen themselves as a success due to their own efforts, now they came to see the failure not as their own failure, but as the failure of the political leadership, of the political elite. And they blamed them. They blamed the political leadership for their fate. And it is exactly their anger with that Donald Trump rode into the White House. He became their voice. And he proclaimed himself to be their voice. And their voice was to blame immigrants, to blame minorities, people of color. And while many of them had an element of racism from before then, that got reinforced and expanded. And so they became devoted followers of him, but continued to be anti-establishment, against the political establishment of both parties. The Republican Party has tried to ride that by saying, oh, we're also against that. We're with Trump all the way. But it wasn't just that they instinctively blamed themselves. They came to understand that there were others responsible, initially the political elite, but then Trump displaced that blame onto minorities. That's my take on it.
Okay, Cliff. Well, it's a long answer to that question, so I'm not gonna try to provide it fully. I'll just give you a few talking points around it. Okay, the move to the right began in the 70s, not in the 2000s, not in 2016, and it began because the capitalist class was in a crisis, starting with the 1972-73 economic collapse and the the oil crisis, the lack of gas, etc. That class decided that they needed to cut back on what had been given to working class, that they saw too much privilege developing in working class people, and that's why they were flirting with overturning the society. That's why people were flirting with this new left that had gained tremendous support in the society. And so they began to create a situation in which people would be very insecure. And you couldn't even count on whether your gas would get you to the next to the next place where you could fill up. There was a huge and that was just one of many things that they did to develop insecurity in the working class. Now that could have been countered by a class conscious alternative, but the Democratic Party had not chosen people who had class consciousness. And I had this talk with McGovern, who was the candidate in 1972 for the presidency, in which he ran for against the war to get the nomination, and then he didn't mention the war in the general election. He spent most of his time trying to reassure Wall Street that he wouldn't bankrupt them. And instead of saying, yeah, we're going to take money from you, we're going to give it to working class people, et cetera. The Democrats in the next election in 76, they chose, what's his name? The president from 76 to 80, guy who endorsed my book, so I don't want to put him down too much, but what's his name? The president that, anyway, he was the most conservative of the Democratic hopefuls who were running for the nomination for the presidency. So they picked the most conservative of those candidates, Carter. And Carter was a very good guy, but he was engaged in that same kind of blaming. He gave a talk that became the centerpiece of people's reaction to him. That seemed to be saying America is screwed up because you Americans are screwed up. There was no class analysis, no sense of what was people. Yes, people were feeling very insecure in their lives, but it wasn't because they were screwed up. It was because the system was screwed up. But Carter did not yet have the progressive consciousness that he developed after he lost the presidency and became much more progressive in the next 30, 40 years. So why was this happening? Well, okay, so I was doing my research right then, okay? You're telling me what was going on. I'm telling you what was going on a different way, based on interviews with thousands, and not just interviews, but groups also, with thousands of middle-income working people. And I'm saying that the self-blaming was a central part, but that of it. But the other part was that the labor movement was defeated really in the anti-communist period from the 1945 to 1960. So that by the 1960s and certainly by the 1970s, the labor movement was filled with people who had no vision except a very, very narrow vision. How do I know this? Because eventually we in our organizing of the Institute for Labor and Mental Health, we're training people who working in unions who were beginning to take over local unions. And so the national AFL-CIO stepped in and started to say, don't work with these people, okay? Because we're too radical, okay? So, and they invited me to meet with the national president of the AFL-CIO. So I went to meet with him. I'm forgetting his name now because I'm at that stage in life where names are not easily retained. So he said to me, look, we know what you want to do. You want to give people the idea that they should have worker control over the workplace. He said, but we can't let that happen. You see, we don't believe in that. Okay, this is the national president of the AFL-CIO. Okay, we don't believe in that. What we believe in is that we should just help people with their grievances, workplace grievances. That's the goal of the union movement. You want to expand the goal to doing something much more transformative. That's not who we are, and we're not going to allow you to do that. And that's why we're trying to stop our locals in the Bay Area from having any further dealing with you. So Kirkland was his name. Okay, so he was so empowered that he could tell the truth. Okay, he was talking the truth to me about really what was going on and saying, yeah, we don't want that larger vision here. We want a narrow vision. Well, that narrow vision was not sustainable because the ruling elites at that time were aggressively trying to disempower the labor movement. And so in 1980, with the election of Reagan in 1980, Reagan just fired all the people who worked from the
Air traffic controllers.
The controllers that were on strike, and said, okay, let them all go on strike. We're going to fire them all. And they did fire them all. Okay. They were interested in repressing that movement. And so so from then on, the labor movement became less and less and less powerful. And at the same time, big capital was saying, and we're going to try to move a lot of our capital to other places in the world. We're going to adopt neoliberal policies, as you said, but it's a much more complicated than just neoliberalism. And neoliberalism was one element in an aggressive struggle by the ruling elites of this country to put down and make powerless the working class of the society. Now, that they could then go and back somebody who's from that class, okay, that craziness is because we had, first of all, 8 years of Obama as president, in which there was this huge economic crisis that he inherited. And instead of taking the money that was being given to the government to try to repair it by bailing out all the millions of people who were losing their homes, he took that money and gave it to bail out the capitalist class, the Wall Street and the investors. So, of course, why should they trust that? Okay, I'm gonna say this 1 second. Call you back in a minute. Bye. Okay. So I have to go. Okay, but thank you, Cliff, for giving me this opportunity. I wish there had been a lot more people listening, but I'm glad that I've been able to benefit from your work through the decades, and all the other people who asked very important and significant questions. And thank you, Kat, for joining me on this. And thank you again, Cliff.
Yeah. And by the way, Michael, I would not disagree with anything that you just said. And I thank you for filling in a couple decades that I left out of my summary.
Yes.
Very short summary. But yes, I want to thank Michael Lerner and Kat Zavis for a very stimulating discussion. And there were more watching it than you realized. There were people on YouTube, and there are many who will see it on YouTube because it will be available there. We've recorded it, and we generally have more people watching it later than watch it live.
Okay, great. Just say one other thing. Well, after you go off, give me a call again, because I want to say one other thing that's just about my relationship to that community there. Actually, I could say it right now. I missed an opportunity to speak there 5 years ago, right?
Yes.
And I am very, very sorry about that. I think I made a big mistake. I thought that I was needed in Israel. That was a stupid manifestation of grandiosity, thinking that I was going to make any difference there. And so I really want to apologize to the people there whom I let down by not showing up there. And anyway.
That's all right. We understood. That was the Moving Beyond Capitalism conference that he was supposed to speak at, but perhaps we'll be able to have you visit us here in San Miguel sometime in the future.
I'd love to have that happen. If Kat and I can get there, that would be great.
Certainly. Once COVID is over, we can begin to meet face to face again.
Great.
But thank you again to both of our speakers for a very stimulating discussion. I hope our audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And I thank of all of you who did contribute to the discussion. Today's webinars, as well as our past programs, are available on YouTube, accessible from our website. I hope you'll join us again next Monday for our next webinar, which let me show you here. I'll share the screen. I'll share the announcement of our next webinar, which is on Cuba, how a revolutionary people have survived in a post-Soviet world. We will have as our speaker Helen Yaffe, whose book, We Are Cuba, has been getting a lot of attention. She's been doing a lot of webinars, and we'll be very delighted to have her as our speaker next Monday, May 3rd. So I hope you'll tune in then. But before signing off, I want to thank our webinar team, Liz Mestris, Gregory Diamond, Roberto Robles, Olivia Canales, Bob Stone, and myself. And for now, this is Cliff Durand signing off until next Monday.